Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Service Management Leadership Podcast. Today we have as a guest someone I've known for better part of a decade, Stephen Taylor. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jeff.
Oh, when I say better part of a decade, it was probably 2011, 2012, where you were the engagement director, engagement manager, lead, whatever, putting in Remedy at where I was working. And man, that was a long time ago.
That was. Yeah, I drove by the old location recently, and now it's, being turned into the whole new area downtown in Oklahoma City. It's a lot of things have changed since we worked there.
Oh man, a long time. So Stephen is one of the brightest technologists I know. And I say that as a sincere compliment. I've worked with a lot of people over the years, so I wanted to have you on, Stephen. You have a breadth and wealth of experience. Let's dive in if we may.
Awesome.
All right. You've been in your role as CIO at Basque Bank. Basque Bank, small, medium size, for a year or two, right? How's that gone for you?
Yeah, it probably feels like 2 years, but it's actually only been a year. I just came up on my year anniversary this month, so good timing there. I would say it's been a very challenging and very interesting role. As you know, from my background, I've been in a lot of different industries, serving IT technology for different industries. So this is my first foray into banking, where I actually worked at a bank as, an employee there in a leadership capacity. So there's been a lot of new learnings for me through some of those processes. I've had great support from the executive team. And I think that one of the things that has been a little bit of a new challenge for us is just the rest of the global world has been a very interesting year anyway. So the combination of those two things has made it to be a lot of learnings and a lot of lessons for me, but it's been a very exciting one.
Yeah, and I think not much has happened this year globally. I say that jokingly. So how have you put your fingerprint on things? Everybody, you step into a leadership position, you spend a while learning and intake, how are we doing things? And then you kind of put your fingerprint on things. How have you done so?
Well, a couple things that I feel are important for leaders, especially new leaders coming into any organization, is to really understand what their personal strengths are and how they add value to the organization. And the second part of that to me is really understanding what are some really solid basic blocking and tackling areas of your organization and remove some of the roadblocks that are, because people generally, there may be pent up frustrations. And if you can remove a couple of those for people, you can get support very quickly. And so one of the first things I did was come in and look at some of the roadblocks, and I saw that we didn't have Wi-Fi at all. And we also didn't have some of the things I consider fairly basic blocking and tackling things, like we didn't have Office 365. You had to be in the office to physically work. And so some of the first things we did was implement Office 365, put in Wi-Fi, get people connected, even things like moving around inside the office, having connectivity, remediating some of the old computers and coming in and bringing in some minor upgrades. And those were things that had been really weighing on people, right? So you pull those things away, and immediately people see that you've made an impact and made a difference. So I think quick, short wins can go a long way to helping putting your fingerprint on it. I think the second one is really understanding your value. And to me, a big part of that is engagement. I think it's really important to have your team members engaged in the process. And there's a lot of people who just generally at their jobs are frustrated or have gone quiet and dormant. So really engaging with those people and pulling them out of their shells, can really turn around a lot of the pieces in your influence. So I did that. Those were the two big things I did first, as soon as I came in, to put my fingerprint on things, was to get people engaged and to remove a couple roadblocks quickly.
And I was thinking on the engagement, IT people aren't usually the easiest to engage. Sometimes,
right.
No, it comes with trust, and I don't mean that as a knock. I mean, you deal with a lot of different persons and personalities, but IT folk are a little different sometimes.
Yeah, and we have quite a few of my team members as examples that were being asked to do some things that they didn't know how to do. and I had I had the ability to do some of those things. So I actually sat down with them and showed them how to do it and collaborated with them, and then publicly gave them praise for doing those things, right? And so that kind of gave those people a sense of ownership and a sense of pride that I think that they hadn't had in a while, and that I think that was a very positive aspect as well.
Affirmation goes a long way. People don't realize, but somebody just being down, being told they did a great job on something, that can last them weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of knowing what your style is and what your strength and really learning how to pull that out of people can go a long way.
I hear you. And so the banking industry is unique. And I say it's unique because we'll get into the COVID stuff later, but it's becoming more and more electronic, being non-retail. So the traditional banking industry, you walk in, and whether you want a loan, whether you want to make a deposit, whatever it is, you walk in and you see someone.
Yeah.
Now we're relying on technology for our banks. Our banks are having to shift. And I get into this, I'll probably get into this in the closing thoughts, but I see it as because the banking customers are changing. Their needs are changing, so the banks have to change. How are you handling all this? Because you're walking in at a time, learning everything, and it's in motion. And how are you adjusting maybe how things have been done in the past to how things should be, or how are you handling that?
Well, so I think what you're talking about is the genesis of why we embarked on our digital transformation program. Digital transformation now is becoming kind of a common buzzword in the industry. It wasn't when we started, but a lot of those changes in customer preferences and the competition, I would say the other thing is the competition from financial technology firms, fintech firms, right? So used to send people money, you'd write them a check or mail them a check, and when consumers started using Venmo or PayPal or these other services, right, they started competing in a lot of ways with banks and in a pure digital online system. And a lot of banks are losing competition to those. I would say that the majority of banks, though, have not reacted to that. So we began responding to that even before I joined the company as part of our program. And you're right, most people haven't been into their bank in the last 12 months. And so you're not physically coming into the bank branches. And so we did start that program specifically to change the bank to becoming a digital bank leader. There's a couple of big things we do, and I'll save some of it maybe for a little later in our conversation. But one of the core things I would say is that change in customer preferences can be viewed as two ways. One, like Barnes and Noble and other companies who as a book company, really struggled in a lot of those industries that became digitized. That time is happening now to banks. So over the next couple of years, the banks that don't transform their processes, I feel will go out of business, right? I think we'll start to see some consolidation and integration in the industry.
Yeah, I do too, especially because we think it's probably been a decade since people were able to get a loan on the internet or, have something in a bank in a different state. And the speed of technology, the rate of change is picking up, I think.
Right.
And so, a year from now, more will have changed than the last year. And seeing how that's going is pretty interesting because your bank, not your bank, but Basque has a lot of locations that are geographically put in but they're put in a region or in a city or a town for a specific reason. That may not be the need a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Is that the way you see it as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of the banks that are really rethinking their branch strategy and thinking their market strategy. And, one of the foundational pieces to that is that digitization piece. But kind of our message is to our customer base is that we want to make banking surprisingly easy. And in order to be surprised in that process, a lot of the things that people do and get approached by are not traditional services companies. So an example I'll use is with Amazon, right? There's a lot of things that Amazon does with their recommendation engine and other things when you buy products that say, here are some other ones that you might want to buy with it, that actually becomes a real convenient copy, right? And so that kind of service, that extra service, a lot of people feel like that's what it means to know me, right? So an example I'll use is if you went to your bank historically and went to open up a loan, they probably started with asking you to fill out a loan application.
Right.
If you've been a bank customer for 10 years, why do you need to fill out an application to tell them who you are whenever you've been a customer for 10 years, right? So just there's some things like that that we're really rethinking, how do we make this whole process and this service as customer centric as possible?
And customer centric is, and people don't want to hear this in IT. And I say this all across the IT board. People don't want to hear this, but as customers, even if I go out to eat or I go to a movie or I go to Walmart, whatever it is, if the priority isn't on the customer, it shows, and I may not be back. And the same thing is happening with IT organizations supporting a business initiative.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, I do. And they'll find alternatives, right? And so ours is really more about, I guess, from the IT perspective, is how do we enable our business groups to be able to compete with globally with our customers? So how do we join them at the hip to where it's not their problem to solve, but it's our problem to help use technology to help them solve that problem? And we have a pretty big road ahead of us, a big hill ahead of us, right, to get over our transformation program and to get onto our new platforms and conversion. There's a lot of work to do right now. But I'm really excited for setting that foundation in place that'll allow us to start competing on a global scale.
That's awesome, especially because IT is an enabler. IT is not the end of the road. It helps the road get longer and faster, and it's an enabler. All right, so one of the big initiatives, and I only know this because I know you and I've worked with you a little bit, is that, and this is huge, because I couldn't imagine doing this during COVID. And I say during COVID like it's some special thing, but you are moving from a vendor ERP that's specific to the banking industry, right, to one that's in-house, a major name. I'll go ahead and, is it okay if I say with the brand?
Yeah, absolutely.
SAP. Yeah. You're moving to SAP from a vendor proprietary type of engagement to a SAP. And SAP ERP implementations are rarely smooth and easy, right? Even on the best of circumstances. How is that going? All right, what helped you make that decision or push you down that path, and how's that going?
Well, so I want to give you a little more context about the banking industry, because it is different in the banking industry. So most of the banking industries, the ERP of the industry is called a core provider, is kind of the term that they use, right? So if I'm going to use my ERP for banking, you're talking about a core provider. So there's just a terminology difference. So the core provider that Vast is using today, that we're moving off of, is called Jack Henry. There's 5 or so core providers in the U.S. Almost all, well over 95% of banks in the United States use one of a handful of core providers. So there's only a few. So when we started looking at our digital transformation program, and we said, what is it going to take for us to truly be competitive in the US in banking and to provide a completely differentiated service, we identified some aspects and talked to all of the core providers and said, we want to push the envelope, and here's what we're looking to do. And none of the core providers had the ability to address most of our topics. And so that's why we decided to do something different. So when we went outside of the United States, most of the banks outside of the United States do not use one of the core providers that are used in the United States. And a lot of them have implemented the systems on their own. And there are multiple industries, multiple banks outside the United States that have implemented SAP as their core, in-house managed core. It just doesn't happen much in the United States. So we are actually the first bank in the United States that has implemented SAP's banking core that is in-house managed, the first bank ever. And so we're working tightly with our regulators to make sure that everything we're doing is regulatory compliant in the United States, and we have partners that are helping us do that implementation. Because the regulatory pieces are very important in banking, as you would want them to be. Safety and soundness of our bank is the first priority, and protecting people's monetary assets and they're providing the right security is a core aspect for us. So it has been a very interesting. We're definitely, as our CEO likes to say, we're definitely going off-roading on a couple of these pieces because we're doing things people haven't done before in the United States. So there are definitely challenges there, but we believe it's going to enable us to do things that other banks can't do at this point.
Those that are watching the video saw me smile because I knew what was coming. The first bank, think about this, a small, medium-sized bank in the Midwest of the U.S., first one to go outside the core. And one of the reasons people use the core is because the regulatory is already baked into the ERP. Yeah. And so you all are first one to go off-roading and still be compliant. That's awesome.
Yeah, and we do have part of our bank running on the new core, and we did our OCC exam this year, and all of it passed really well. So we did everything. We were very regulatory compliant. So we're really happy with the results. The collaboration with them has been, with our regulatory bodies, has been great. It has been challenging, right? I mean, they had a lot of questions, as you can imagine. So it was very involved and intense, but it was a great relationship, and we've really enjoyed the process.
That's awesome, because there are many SAP implementations that have opportunities for future improvement. Yeah. And so that for you all to do this and do this well, kudos to you. So let's talk COVID, the dreaded 5-letter word, right?
Yeah.
It's impacted your bank because it's impacted your customers, how you do business. How has Basque handled this change of way you do business, or how your employees do their jobs?
Well, so the first thing I would say is we got really lucky, and as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, one of the things I looked at when I first came in is what are some of the challenges people were having. And one of the biggest challenges we had was the ability to collaborate between branch locations. And so we implemented Microsoft Teams and the Office 365 suite in order to try to get better collaboration between our bank branches. And we had finished that migration of Teams and the implementation and the moving to Office 365, and got through the full training, got everybody enabled. And as soon as we finished that, COVID hit, right? So luckily, everybody had all been just finished set up to work from home with VPN and with with Microsoft Teams and with video sharing. And so we had just finished rolling out all of our collaboration suite enhancements right before. So luckily, we weren't scrambling to try to get VPN set up and other things. We had just finished that process. So a lot of the, I guess, entry level things, they didn't really seem like they shifted that much. We had just been finished testing a lot of our work from home scenarios, and so when people actually went full-time work from home, right, it didn't really impact us that greatly. Some of the things that did impact us were things like how do you manage people now when they're working from home full-time, and how do you manage the group of people who still have to be in the office? So we still have to have our retail branches open for certain types of activities. So how do you have managers at home and the staff in the office? So there was a lot of things that we went through on that process, and we put together a task force to manage all of the changes in our organization as we were doing that. And I think that was really helpful for helping us navigate through all those changes.
So I went through that at my last corporate job, being in one state and having teams in different. It's a different mentality. It's a different way of looking at things.
Yes.
So work from home, popular topic.
Yeah.
Is it here to stay? You don't have to answer at the vast level, but do you think in general it's here to stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see a higher percentage of people who are working from home more frequently, whether they work from home. Um, you know, if it used to be, say, 90% in the office and 10% at home, maybe it's, 40% in the office and 60% from home or somewhere. I don't think it's going to be a 100% from the office or 100% from home, right? I think the days of it being purely one or the other is going to go away. And I also think that there's a lot of more flexibility kind of aspects that come into play there as well. But I think one of the bigger changes is that has gone along with this is management style change for managing people by outcomes and objectives versus managing people by tasks and from oversight. And the challenge that I see is it's going to be interesting to see how people build and maintain culture in those aspects. So as an example, if I'm going to bring on some new entry level employees or some interns, for example, for 3 months, how do you engage, interns in a work from home scenario? Or how do you, assimilate into a company's culture where historically, maybe it was a happy hour every day or something like that, right? That allowed people to connect. You still have the need to connect in those ways with people in order to keep them engaged. So I think it's important for managers to really think through, how do I keep my employees engaged, especially when I need that discretionary effort? If I need to call somebody at home, at 10 o'clock at night and say, we have this emergency, I need you to jump and drop what you're doing, right? And they feel disengaged because they're working from home on tasks. You're probably not going to get that extra discretionary effort, right? And so building that relationship with the person when you're remote, continuing to do other activities. I think one-on-ones are very important before, they're critical now, right? So, the people and the managers who haven't worked hard on building connections with people, I think are really struggling right now.
Yeah, because I've always felt, whether it's my family or people I worked with, teams, if there's a relationship, you can ask more and they can ask of you. But if there's not a good relationship where there's trust and all the things, you call it discretionary effort. I think it's, I use a little different terminology, but they're exactly the same. I think they'll do the letter of the law of what's asked, not the spirit of the law, and that's really interesting, because to me, the world of IT is going to go more and more that way. There's fewer break room conversations. There's fewer going out to lunch, all those team building and relationship building. So I am keen to understand how people are going to do it, long term, because, think about somebody that's 30 years old. The rest of their career, they may have 30 years of this. All right. What other trends, what other opportunities have you seen that are going to be possibly outputs of COVID? And I tried to frame that in a certain way because I see them as opportunities. I see us work from home as an opportunity for a lot of people.
I think the shift of work out of email and into collaboration systems is one that's actually starting to take off, I think, inside of VAST. And I think people are starting to see the benefits. They didn't see it as much when you're in the office, but they're seeing it now, especially remote. And so an example that I'll use is we had some of the folks who were working around the world. We have, contractors that are in India and Austria and South Africa and different places, right? And when we're engaging with them, and there's different time zone differences, which is maybe more common inside of IT than in other parts of the organization. One of the things is there's a lot of that time delay was email based. And, there's just so many times where you send an email, you wait for the day to hear the response from the email that's sent at your nighttime, right? And so a lot of that engagement and the need for more engagement was, instead of being point to point, so me sending an email to Jeff, if I send an email to the leadership team, right, then it's the collaboration in those spaces and moving that out of that into a ticket management system for problem resolution, or into a, you know, a Jira system for project management. Then everybody gets visibility into all of those conversations. The communication goes up, the level of collaboration goes up, the number of people who can expedite problems goes up, right? So it's the thing is it also helps you focus in on your conversation. So as simple as, we want to work on a document together. Well, why send a document to back and forth in email attachments and have to manage different versions of files when you can post a version out and comment back and forth on the same document in kind of a shared redline repository? And that's become really easy. It's almost become necessary to do, but now that people are starting to do it, they're seeing the power of doing that. And now they're doing that because it's better, it's faster, it's more efficient, it has better communication, right? So I think this enablement of collaboration tools is going to be a permanent change.
And I was going to take it even a step further. You, as leading an IT group, you don't want those big files emailed back and forth,
Right.
you know, taking down your network and your space. But it adds transparency, and it adds the opportunity for escalation. Versus, we all know that person, no mentioning names. When we send an email, we have lower expectations on when it'll be responded to than
Right.
someone else. Now the playing field is leveled. Is that kind of what you're trying to say?
Yeah, well, and just the availability for other people to collaborate and communicate on a particular topic increases dramatically, right? And so it becomes not me having a selection or conversation, a selective conversation with specific people. It becomes us having a department level communication, right, or collaboration. And so just the volume, I think, and the frequency, and the reality is things are moving faster because of that. And so, you know, I think people also get a little bit of overwhelmed nature with email, right? Where your inbox, I get 400 unread items in my inbox, and at some point I just give up, right? I can't deal with it. I'm just going to ignore the 400 on the bottom, right? So, I mean, I think it's important that if somebody else picks up that item, right? You go into, somebody asks you a question, somebody else responds to that question, right? A lot of times you don't have, it's no longer your action, right? So I think the speed at which decisions get made and the speed at which things move is significantly faster with those collaboration tools.
You said it much better than I did. And especially when we think of, it becomes less of a you and me problem, but more of an us problem, right?
That's
So
right.
in the world of banking, people don't think of this initially or intuitively, but data is a huge opportunity, problem to solve, whatever you want to say, because it's a double-edged sword. You get all this information about your clients. You mentioned earlier, how do we offer new products for them or services to them? But it's a double-edged sword. You have all these regulatory requirements too. How are you handling data and both the opportunity side as well as the regulatory side? It's a big problem for many organizations.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, before I comment on any other parts of it, I would say are the most important part for us is protection of customer privacy.
Yes.
People's personal information is about themselves, especially in banking. You know, there is a lot of very private information that nobody would want their bank to provide out, right? And there are a lot of the less regulated parts of the industry that you know, if you look at social media and some of the things they're doing with privacy, personally I find pretty offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And professionally I find it, you know, egregious, not just offensive, right? So for I think for banking, one of the things we try to do is we do want to make sure that the users and our customers, both the internal users and our customers, are always, their data is protected. So some of the things that we do are include masking, right? So there's a technology that lets you let people have access to see stuff, but certain types of information is scrambled, right? So I can query a table with social security numbers, and the social security numbers have valid numbers, but they're not the real ones, right? They're scrambled up. And so, and it's not just they're reordered, they're actually just, anyway, there's a whole set of technologies that really can enable you to do that. And I think that's really important. I think another piece I would say is uh, collecting data for the sake of collecting data usually doesn't do any good. So it's important that the collection of that data historically was very expensive to do. And now with, more and more storage costs are becoming very inexpensive, we're collecting, data in larger volumes. But one of the things we're trying to be really intentional about is how do we provide visibility to that data in a way that makes it useful? Because a lot of the data, especially telemetry style data, can be really hard for anybody to interpret actively, right? So making that data available and useful are two different challenges. The other thing that I would add is what I would call the freshness of data is a challenge in general that we've really tried to address. So our system that we're implementing, the SAP system, uses a HANA's in-memory database technology, and we're doing real-time replication of that technology. So there are a lot of banking systems that are batch files that run at night and make copies of data, and now you have to keep all those copies of the data in sync with each other and do quality control checking, and I mean, it's just a mess, right? And so the ability to have your data systems that are used for reporting purposes being real-time replicated copies, then when somebody goes and looks at the data, it's live, current, up to date all the time, is a big differentiator.
I will tell you this. I know a company, if I said the name, you'd know them too. And they've been building this data lake, their words, not mine, for a long time without requirements of how that data is going to be used. And I was thinking, why buy a car if you don't know where you're going to drive it? Let's figure out where we need to go and then buy the right car for that trip. And it's just interesting to me because you're right. More data isn't always the right thing because it takes you a while to parse out what you want out of that. And it's interesting because data is so rich in opportunities that it's got to be handled well. And those of you that aren't in the banking world, the banking regulatory requirements are even down to personal easy for me to say, identifiable information, PII data, as well as the banking stuff. So, you have to keep separate the person, their address, their social security number, all that stuff, plus the financial. And so there's a lot of regulatory, and rightly so, requirements.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of other things too that it is important that we address in our industry and really provide that level of protection. And I think it's important that when you're thinking about the process of making copies or duplicates of that data, that all of the processes and control models that you have in place around that data go with it, right? And so a lot of people that just take all their data and put it in a data lake, the controls that they have on the source system typically aren't there on the data lake. And so you just have to be especially careful in our industry.
With it, especially if you're making copies, each copy has to have the same level of controls.
Well, we also have some other things I think that are really good processes and policies that we put in place. Things like, if you have contractors and other people, third parties that are engaged, we have policies and contractual obligations where they're not allowed to copy any of our data at any time into non-BAS systems, right? So there are a lot of processes we have in control where, even simple stuff like, hey, I'm going to take this data offline on my laptop and do some analysis and development. It's like, no, you're not, right? We have policies that prevent that, and we have controls that prevent that. And so it's just important that we protect people's data, even if it's mock data.
And if it's my data, I want you to control it as much as best, the highest level as possible, right? I mean, and that's what you're doing. You're saying, I'm treating everybody's data like it was my own.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
all right, so let's get into emerging technologies, AI, RPA, CI/CD,
Mhm.
continuous deployment. Are you all utilizing any of these? I call them emerging technologies. They've been emerging for years, but are you all incorporating any?
We are, especially a lot of the RPA and the AI components more so than and some of the others. I'll talk about them for a second. But you know, as part of our SAP implementation, we're using a very heavy set of RPA agents that are also helping automate a lot of the activities inside of SAP. So we have, you know, robotic jobs that are sitting and looking for processing to automate those tasks and activities that we do in the bank. Our online account opening process, for example, on the retail side, and when one of our partners that we've launched with a financial technology firm, you can do the entire online account opening for a new bank account without ever, not only not coming into the bank, but you never have to talk to a person. So you can do 100% self-service, go through the whole process. And that includes all of the know your customer checks and the customer information, background checks and the security checks. All of that stuff is all fully automated end to end. And so those are kind of some of the things that we're working on to, one, make the experience better for the customer, because we've taken things that used to require people and we're automating those activities, right? And we're then able to, you know, have some of our internal people perform higher level functions. So they get to work on making that automation better and the processing, and not just doing the process manually every day. And so we're pretty excited to see where that leads with our kind of our new launch and our core conversion next year when we go fully automated with a lot of processes. I think we're really there's a lot of exciting things coming over the next year.
That's awesome. Self-serve is here to stay in every organization. People, I use this analogy all the time. And when you and I were kids, we're a little bit different in age, but you know, of course, he looks better than I do. But your parents would say, go do it, go look it up in the phone book yourself, right? Our kids' generation, let's Google it online. You know, Google has become a verb. It's self-service. And people don't realize there's artificial intelligence and all this other stuff behind that. And now everybody wants that same level of self-service in everything they do. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? Like, I don't want, if I'm having an issue with an Amazon order, I don't want to call them. I barely want to use their chat. I want it to be able to search and figure it out. And I assume the same is true for banking and your banking customers and all of those types of paradigm shifts.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple examples. So one is a pretty simple one I think most people can relate to, is if we take, you know, your phone and you get a check and you want to deposit it, the remote deposit capture, take a picture of your check, right? Those fairly standard processes. The checks have to be formatted and set up in a particular way. Well, one of the things we do is we can automatically crop it, shape it, turn it sideways, the lighting in the right way, right? We can do all those adjustments with software to where we can take that, not only take that picture, then we can use optical character recognition and some AI engines to extract the text out of it to, you know, to get the amounts and everything else automatically extracted and put into it. So, you know, those kinds of applications of artificial intelligence, people don't necessarily think of, you know, hey, I've got robots running around everywhere, right? But it's those things that just where the technology just works in a very simple way, and it makes that process smoother and better for you is the way that we think about it. So some more, maybe more simple examples that we've been talking about that is kind of a balance between our earlier conversation around privacy with some customer service, is if a person does come into a bank branch, for example, and you can have it recognize that person and automatically bring up their record, and then when the person walks up to the teller, they already have all the information about the customer in front of them, right? So, you know, some real simple applications, but processes that can make the experience better. and make that whole process smooth. We're trying to figure out what is all of the things that would really make an effective use at home. And then some of the back end processes, as an example, you know, if I see that I've been out buying hammers and, you know, sheetrock and other stuff, right? Why not reach out to you and say, hey, it looks like you're doing some home construction. Would you like a home improvement loan, right?
Right.
So some things that, how do you do that in a way that respects people's privacy, doesn't come off creepy, but actually provides a higher value of service to them, right? Because that's really what it's about, is we really want to, you know, have people feel like we're engaged with them as a bank and we're really trying to help them and make their life easier.
And it goes from loans, business or personal, it goes throughout the business. I even think of treasury, right? Because people want some short-term access to capital. Some of that can be done self-service.
Yep.
I would think pretty easily. So we talked about how the banking industry is moving. 5 years from now, it's hard for us to see 5 months from now, but 5 years from now, how will those needs of the customer change, and IT supporting it, how is it going to evolve?
Well, I don't know if you've been following the OCC's recent announcements, but there has been some announcements around crypto.
Mhm.
So they've actually come out with some guidance documents about the, you know, supporting banks to providing crypto services. We do believe that the trends are going to go more and more towards the average person using, you know, some type of cryptocurrency more in their day-to-day interactions. So if we're looking 5 years out, I think we're going to see the banks that have adopted and implemented crypto services for their communities are going to be thriving. They're going to be ahead of the curve for those particular transactions. I also see that the needs of most customers and most businesses, especially on the commercial side business, the need to move to more real-time systems instead of systems that take, you know, in some cases 3-4 days to settle, you know, is just too long. Even some simple ones on the equity side, you know, if I go buy some stock, right, in order for me to buy some stock, it's going to take 2 or 3 days to settle, right? That whole process, I think, is going to, we're going to see some fairly substantial changes to where more and more systems are going to have to be real time for people to compete.
Even like checks clearing, you know, those 48, 72 hours, I don't write very many checks, but
Right.
I know people that get irritated because it's out of their account, but it's not in the next person's account for 72, 48 to 72 hours. And they're like, why the lag? And so it's interesting.
Well, I do see, I think we believe that most people are going to be, already are, and are starting to demand and move towards banks that are going to provide that service, where all of those fund movement is happening in real time.
I'm with you. And real time is what we expect. When
Yeah.
I was a kid, I was the remote control for my parents. Get up and go turn the channel. And now everything's a microwave, remote control, instant.
Yeah.
So if two more questions as we wrap up. It's a great conversation. I appreciate your time, Stephen.
You
If you
bet.
had the resources, what would you say? What would you plead with leadership to invest in? Because it's gonna bring a lot of value to the bank.
So, you know, I would say in a lot of cases with our digital transformation, we're already investing in those things. So, I mean, they've been very supportive. And one of the things I think is really important is that a lot of these types of changes, it's very important that you have good leadership alignment from the CEO and president all the way down. I would say the majority of the changes are most effective where they're coming from demands from either, you know, the president, CEO, or a direct report, right? So it needs to be somebody either on the board or in that senior executive team that is really championing it. And I don't mean that they've said, okay, my manager is really requesting it, so I'll sign off and say I have approval, right? I mean, they believe in it, they're passionate about it, and they're demanding it from their organization to change. I think that some of these changes are big enough, and, you know, if you're going through organizational change management kind of activities, the first thing you want to do is to try to find a sponsor and an owner who's really passionate about this particular change. So I think one of the challenges is always that, kind of one of Drucker's kind of core models is there's very few bad ideas are presented, right? The real challenge to management is figuring out of the good ideas that are presented, which ones do you say no to? Saying yes is easy, saying no is hard, right? And the organizations can only thrive if you have the resources and alignment on the priorities that are the most important. So rationalizing and reconciling which ones you're saying no to, shut them down, and to really focus on the ones that you're saying yes to is important. And so
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's really important as a leadership team is that when you're looking for support, is that you get that level of top-down support to help you in your particular initiatives. But of the ones that I think that are important for the bank, I think it's more and more of those activities that can help provide full automation of banking services to customers, the customer-centric activities, to where it can be that pure self-service and the higher value add offerings to your customer.
And you think about it, 10 years from now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we talked about customer satisfaction. That was buzzwords. Now it's excellence. It's their, user experience. We've upped that level so high that as a bank trying to provide those services, expectations are high, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it's, I'll use a specific example. So if somebody wants to open an account, right, and they go to your page and they get a form to fill out that they fill out, and then that form gets submitted to a person, and then on the back end, you have somebody, receiving the form and then manually doing 500 processes or handing off multiple people. And then, a day later, you get a response back to the form you submitted. That to me is not what I'm talking about, right? That is not self-service kind of activity. The real question is what is the outcome, right? So from the time the customer starts it to the time they get a response, having that whole process where the submission and response that comes back is the full closed loop automation is what I'm talking about. So those are very difficult things to do, right? So really understanding what ones you want to tackle and being able to kind of span across organizations, pull together an agile team that can help you work through all the different parts of the system to help get that automation to happen is challenging. And I think a lot of folks are limited by the technologies of their core provider, and so that's one of the reasons we made the changes that we're making.
Because not to bang on the core providers, but they've done business a certain way for a long time. Yeah. And getting them to stretch and evolve for one customer is a little more difficult. I mean, because they're saying this is our core competency. Why should we change or evolve for just you? And so I see why you all made that decision. So lastly, there's advances in technology coming fast and furious. I used this a few weeks ago. You remember back in the old days where Intel and Microsoft had this planned obsolescence, and you were on these cycles. We all remember those fun days. But now it's disruption from other industries. It's, the cycles are spun so quickly, and we don't know where these new technologies that we're going to leverage, we don't know where they're going to come from. So what advances in technology do you foresee changing how Basque does business? I mean, I'm thinking like 10,000 feet in the air. How are we going to look at our customers and their problem statements differently 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think to your point, there are going to be a lot of the technologies that are going to continue to shift, right, and evolve very quickly. And I think it's important to understand that there's only so many technical areas that you should or can invest in, similar to what I talked about before, about really knowing what are the most painful parts for your customer and where the most value add parts that you can add for your customer, and focus on those areas and the most advanced places of technology application to those areas, and then use technology and services that are provided by other companies in the areas that aren't truly competitively differentiators, right? So as an example, the one that I mentioned before, we didn't go build our own collaboration suite, right? And it doesn't make sense to do that. Microsoft Office 365 is I mean, we could have chosen Google Docs or any of the other services too, right? But I think it's important in that particular area that those things are going to change, and, you know, constantly reinvesting in some of those technologies in a way should be not your core banking practice, right? So as a bank, it's not like, how do I go write something that's going to be cutting edge on the collaboration side? That's not your core business. So you really want to make sure that you're investing in areas that are going to help your core business. How are you going to help, you know, the bank do banking? How are you going to help your customers do banking? And really invest in the technologies that will make a competitive differentiation there. An example I'll use is, you know, look at the way that mobile has changed. You know, the newest iPhone is way better than the highest end computer that I could have bought that whenever we first started working together, right? And so the technology on the consumer side is going to be rapidly changing, and the more you can do to help stay connected to those kind of investments and make sure that the consumer technologies work and you're integrated well for that experience, you're going to provide higher customer service to them.
And I use this story. I don't bank with Fast. I probably should after this story. You're going to appreciate. The bank I use gives me a choice to either use their app or online or have paper statements. Their two-factor authentication stinks, as well as their app. So I get paper statements the 5th or the 6th of every month. And it's frustrating because you talk about real time, you know, once a month is about the furthest from real time as it gets. But I'm stuck between this quandary, because if I have an app that I can't use and no paper statements, that's even worse than the paper statements. And when I mention this bank, it's a several billion-dollar bank. It's a big one. And
Right.
I'm just like, can you help me here? And, you know, they can't.
No, and a lot of times they're limited by, again, what their provider makes available to them. And then sometimes they have multiple different providers that are all technically limiting to them, that they're having to navigate between them. So it becomes a really, really difficult challenge to do, right? Is to be able to manage those particular things. And it becomes a limiting factor with what you can offer to your customers. And when the technology at the consumer level is changing so fast, it becomes a very, very difficult thing to be able to keep up with that level of technology change.
Oh yeah, I couldn't imagine going to them for anything other than a checking account because of this, you know. And so anyway, it's just one of those things. Stephen, we appreciate you being on the podcast. Hopefully you'll come back in the coming months as well. It's been very informative for me, and I knew a little bit about you and Vass. Any parting thoughts?
I think that, you know, one, I want to say thank you as well for having me on the podcast. It's been a great conversation. I always enjoy my conversations with you, Jeff. I just encourage people to think about ways to keep their customers and their teams during this COVID pandemic timeframe, keep them engaged, keep them safe, and keep them happy.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because there's a lot of people that are unhappy, you know, that just the weight of all that's going on right now is weighing them down. And it's tough, you know. Everybody we meet is going through something, and how can we help them? And so I appreciate your parting words. So thank you, Stephen, and we hope to have you on very, very soon.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
And we'll be right back with Jeffrey's closing thoughts. Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey, and we're back with closing thoughts. I only have 3 quick thoughts I want to leave with you, and I first want to start with thanking Stephen for being with us. Stephen is one of the sharpest guys I know. He's so bright in the technology sector. I've known him for a lot of years, and I say he's very bright. And he's handled a lot of different situations very, very well. But let's move on. Let's think about what we learned in this conversation, because Stephen is so bright. He makes it sound so easy, but it's not, is it? If your organization is struggling in these ways, reach out to me and I'll put you in contact with others who may be able to help if it's outside of our realm at Service Management Leadership. With small and medium-sized banks, the paradigm is shifting. As we talked about with Stephen, fewer people are going into branches, fewer people are going in and talking to someone. They want, as we shift to this online banking through an app, they want their banks to adjust to how now these companies are doing business. There's a trickle down, if you can tell, between how banks are doing business now, or it's being forced by their customers and the needs of those customers and how their organizations are being impacted. We're in COVID time now. How long will we be in this mode? Who knows? Will it be forever? I assume there'll be some things that we come out of this with that will be with us forever. It has changed the way we do business. But if you're at a small or medium-sized bank, even large one, let us know if we can help you in your business continuity planning, especially as you try to navigate the FFIEC regulatory requirements, if you will. We've done that. We can do that for you. We can also help you save money because it's so much that is relied on outside vendors, outside service providers, as well as software. We can help you there. And through maybe even introducing you to people who are square in the niche that you're looking for. Happy to be a conduit, not looking to make anything selfishly, but just trying to help people do what they need to do in these small banks, medium-sized banks, large enterprises. We all need each other. And that is one of the things that long-term relationships in the business world, like I've known Stephen and appreciate his work for a lot of years. These relationships are what we remember. We know who to call when blank. If you have a plumbing problem in your house, you know who to call most of the time. Same with electrician, things of that nature. I'm happy to help you if you need somebody to call for something that's even outside of our expertise. I just want to be of help to you. And I thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. We have a great show next week planned. Hopefully you'll continue with us. These are exciting times for us and this podcast as we've had such a wealth of experience on this show. I hope you have a great, great day. Goodbye.